Hello friend, welcome to Stories by Tochi. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please don't forget to hit the like button, please share, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you for doing so. Now let's get into the story. The kettle in Nneka's Cardiff flat whistled softly, but he didn't move an inch. He stood at the window, staring into the dull gray sky as if it held the answers he'd been chasing for years. His tea had gone cold on the counter, and so had his appetite. There were days when his life felt like a quiet room filled with ticking clocks, everything running, nothing living. On the outside, Nneka was every bit the success story his hometown, Iziora, liked to boast of, a man who had crossed the ocean and found his footing in the land of fog and structure. Civil engineer by training, respected in his firm, known for the calm tone he used even in disagreement. But behind his kind smile and fitted suits lay a man who had watched love slip through his fingers more times than he could count. The women came like dry season rain, brief, beautiful, and gone before they could soak through. Sometimes it ended with silence, sometimes with tearful calls. But the pattern remained. Everything blossomed until they visited home, and then it died like a candle in harmattan wind. He couldn't explain it, and the weight of not knowing had started to wear grooves in his soul. His mother and Iziora would still call, urging him to bring a wife home, like it was as easy as fetching water from the backyard tap. But love wasn't a faucet, and Nneka had long since stopped believing it would flow on demand. It was his sister Gina who often came up in these conversations, Gina the dependable, Gina the ever-ready. Gina, who had kept the home business alive while Nneka was abroad chasing plans and pavement. At 32, she was unmarried too, though no one pressured her about it the way they did Nneka. She ran the family supermarket and laundry outlet with the sort of precision that could shame a Swiss watch. Whenever Nneka visited, she handed him reports with numbers so organized they looked like courtroom evidence. "Just keeping things steady, brother," she would say with a grin that didn't always reach her eyes. She never complained, never asked for a raise, never dropped hints about wanting more. If anything, she acted like her brother's success was her own mirror. But even mirrors can lie if you stare too long. Nneka couldn't quite place it, but something about Gina's calm always felt like water just before it boils, still, but not peaceful. She was good at what she did, no doubt. Yet when it came to his romantic life, Gina had a curious way of making the women uncomfortable. At first, Nneka thought it was just clashing personalities, city girls versus home-trained guardians. But the frequency, the pattern, the eerie regularity of it began to wear a groove of suspicion. Still, he said nothing. Family was like yam. You didn't peel it with a cutlass unless you wanted to lose fingers. And so the silence grew. Then came Adise. Unlike the other women, she didn't sparkle like firecrackers in December. She had a quiet light to her, the kind that didn't need a crowd to glow. Nneka met her during one of his brief visits to Nigeria for his cousin's wedding. She was seated at the back of the church, not chatting, not scrolling through her phone like most people her age. Just sitting, soft eyes following the choir like she was trying to taste the lyrics. Something about her calm called to his chaos. They started talking, slowly, like careful builders placing stone after stone. She wasn't loud, but her voice had a thoughtful cadence. She ran her late father's printing press, a small but busy setup in Godo. There was ink on her fingers and logic in her eyes. Nneka found himself drawn to her in a way that scared him. With Adise, there were no theatrics, no drama. She asked questions no other woman had asked him, questions about his sleep, his fears, his father's death. It was the first time in years he felt seen, not just admired. They parted when he flew back to Cardiff, but their conversations continued like a long thread across the ocean, video calls, shared playlists, inside jokes. She made his mornings warmer and his nights less hollow. And after 4 months of speaking daily, Nneka did something he hadn't done with the last 3 women. He asked Adise to meet his family. She hesitated at first, not from fear, but caution. "You are my only link there," she said softly. "If they don't like me, would it matter?" He told her Gina was easy to love. He didn't know how wrong he was. Adiz arrived in Iziora on a Thursday afternoon, dressed simply in jeans and a flowing top. Her travel bag had just a few clothes, a Bible, and the small scented candles she liked to use during her evening quiet time. She smiled easily, spoke politely, and offered to help Gina in the shop before even being asked. For the first 2 days, Gina played her part like a veteran actress. She cooked pepper soup with fresh catfish, offered Adiz a room that faced the backyard garden, and even bought her a wrapper as a welcome gift. Adiz called Neka and gushed, "Your sister is kind. I think we'll get along." Neka smiled into the phone, his heart rising with hope. But just like dry wind carries sand before the storm, Gina's kindness was short-lived. By the 3rd day, her words started to carry tiny thorns. "You're beautiful, oh," she said one morning, "but you know men like Neka need women who can carry heavy things, mentally, spiritually, even physically." Adiz laughed politely, unsure what to make of it. Then came the questions cloaked in conversation. "You're running your papa's printing press alone?" "Ah, it's not easy." "Can you imagine managing this shop and Neka at once?" The weight of those words hung in the air like smoke that didn't rise. Adiz felt it, but didn't understand it yet. She called Neka again, her voice a bit flatter. "Your sister, she's different now. Cold, maybe tired." "Is she always like that?" Neka laughed, not with mockery, but disbelief. "No, nah, Gina is harmless." But the words hadn't left his mouth before a strange knot formed in his chest. Something was off. He could feel it, like a room you enter and instantly sense you're not welcome. The sound of the evening bell from St. Leo's church floated faintly through the trees as Adiz stood in the corridor outside her guest room, staring blankly at the compound wall. She clutched a small towel, pretending she was heading for her bath, but in truth, she just needed a breath that didn't carry the scent of tension. Gina had spent the entire afternoon rearranging the shelves in the supermarket while Adiz sat nearby, folding newly unpacked aprons. At first glance, nothing seemed wrong, just two women working side by side. But underneath the shared tasks were words that scratched instead of soothed. Gina had a way of speaking in riddles that left Adiz doubting herself. She would say things like, Neka is used to a certain way of life abroad. Women there don't ask too many questions. Or, my brother has been through a lot. Any woman who comes must be ready to hold her breath through the storm. Adiz smiled and nodded, but each phrase felt like a tiny blow below the ribs. That evening, Gina had cooked a bono soup with goat meat but didn't call Adiz to eat until she had finished her own meal. "I didn't want to disturb your rest," she explained, her voice soaked in fake sweetness. Adiz ate quietly, the silence in the dining area thicker than the soup itself. She missed Neka's voice, his laughter, his calm. She wanted to call him, but didn't want to sound like a nagging guest, so she held her peace, hoping the storm would pass, not knowing it was only just gathering clouds. By the 5th day, Adiz's phone calls to Neka grew shorter, her laughter less frequent. She began to second-guess everything, from the way she dressed to how she poured water into a cup. Gina had planted so many seeds of doubt that they'd started to grow roots in Adiz's chest. That morning, Gina had invited her to help sort financial receipts in the back office. She said while flipping through a stack of ledger books, "Neka trusts me with all this. Some women would try to come in and change everything, and that usually ends in disaster." Adiz didn't respond. She simply nodded and passed another stapled document across the table. Later that afternoon, Gina mentioned a woman Neka once dated abroad, a lawyer or accountant or something sharp like that, and how devastated he had been when she left. They had a kind of chemistry you can't fake, she said with a nostalgic sigh. Adiz felt a strange hollowness in her stomach. She didn't know why these comments bothered her so much, but they did. They lingered like smoke after fire. That night, she sat at the edge of her bed, staring at a half-written text to Nneka. "I don't feel welcome here." She deleted it, rewrote it, deleted it again. Instead, she called him and said, "I might return to Ngodo tomorrow or the day after. I just have some things to handle." Nneka didn't question it. He only said, "Let me know if Gina gives you any trouble. She can be a bit intense sometimes." Adez almost laughed. That was like calling a scorpion playful. But she said nothing, and they ended the call with a tired good night. Gina, on her part, didn't relax even for a moment. She watched Adez like a border guard, noting every mood swing, every yawn, every blink. To the untrained eye, Gina's actions looked like hospitality, offering to wash Adez's clothes, giving her small gifts, checking in on her often. But everything had an undertone, like a drumbeat that only the dancer could hear. One afternoon, while Adez was peeling yam in the kitchen, Gina casually said, "I once had a friend who came to visit. My brother liked her too. But when she realized how serious the business was, she quietly backed out. I think it overwhelmed her." Adez looked up, her knife still in her hand. She smiled, but the gesture didn't reach her eyes. It was then she realized Gina wasn't just passively observing her. She was testing her, pushing her, seeing how far she could be stretched before she'd snap. Adez suddenly remembered a saying her grandmother used often. "If the chicken pecks you once, it's a game. If it keeps pecking, it's war." That night, while brushing her teeth in the backyard, she made up her mind. She would leave the next morning, without drama, without announcement. She wasn't running away, she was retreating from a war she never signed up for. Sometimes, knowing when to leave was not weakness. It was wisdom wrapped in silence. By the time Nneka received Adez's message, she was already halfway back to Ngodo. Her words were short but heavy, like a nail hammered straight into his chest. "I don't think I'm the one for you. Your family is nice, but I don't feel I belong. Maybe we rushed things." Nneka stared at the message, reading it over and over like it might rearrange itself into something softer. His heart sank like wet cement in a gutter. He tried calling, but it rang out. He messaged again. Nothing. The air in his Cardiff flat suddenly felt colder, the silence louder. Another one gone. Another door slammed shut without warning. And just like that, the cycle repeated itself. His mind spun back to Michelle, Linda, and even Zainab. Each had followed the same pattern. Each had met Gina. Each had left quietly, like a broken record playing the same sad tune. He stood up and paced the room, his fingers tightening around his phone. "Why?" he muttered aloud. "What is it I'm missing?" He didn't want to accuse his sister. Not yet. But a part of him, deep and hidden, began to suspect that maybe the common denominator in this recurring heartbreak wasn't the women. Maybe the storm had been inside his house all along. The days that followed Adez's departure fell over Nneka's shoulders like a wet blanket, heavy, cold, and impossible to shake off. Work meetings blurred into one another. His appetite wavered between mild bites and untouched plates, and even his beloved weekend jogs by Cardiff Bay felt like punishment rather than therapy. At first, he told himself it would pass, just like the others had. But something about Adez's absence refused to settle. She had left quietly, respectfully, yet the hole she left behind echoed louder than any argument or insult ever could. Nneka would lie awake at night, eyes glued to the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every laughter-laced memory, trying to pinpoint the exact moment things turned. There was no fight, no betrayal, just a steady erosion of peace. And the more he thought, the more his mind began circling around Gina like a vulture around a wounded animal. Not with hatred, no, but with sharp suspicion. It was like discovering your shadow had been whispering behind your back all along. He began revisiting old voice notes from Michelle, the British-Nigerian nurse he dated 2 years prior. "Your sister means well," she had said with forced cheer, "but I'm not sure I can win her approval. It's like every time I try, she raises the bar. Nneka had brushed it off then, thinking it was just the usual cultural tension between diaspora living and local expectations. But now, the puzzle pieces were beginning to form a picture he didn't want to see. Out of curiosity, or perhaps desperation, he decided to call Zainab, the Ghanaian software analyst he had dated 3 years ago. They hadn't spoken in over a year, but when he texted to ask if she could spare him 10 minutes of honesty, her reply came swiftly. "I've been waiting for this call." Her voice was calm, slightly amused, like someone who had watched a storm coming long before the rain began. "Nneka," she said, "your sister is brilliant, no doubt. But she's also territorial. The day I visited, she took me to the shop and said something I'll never forget. She looked me dead in the eye and said, 'You seem like a good person. But if you're planning to take over my brother's business or change how we do things, then you're not the one for him.'" Nneka's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't a threat in tone, but it was a clear warning. Stay away from the controls. Zainab went on. "I wanted to tell you then, but I knew you wouldn't believe me. You loved her so much. It's like she was both your sister and your shield. And I didn't want to come between that." The call ended quietly. No accusations, no bitterness, just the kind of truth that stings more because it arrives too late. Nneka sat still for a long while after. He felt like a man who had opened a sealed cupboard and found dust where memories should have been. He wasn't just dealing with lost love anymore. He was facing the reality that the person he trusted most may have been the quiet hand behind the broken glass. Unable to sit still, he rang Henry, his older cousin, the only one in the family who had a gift for truth-telling wrapped in sarcasm. They hadn't spoken in a few months, but the moment Henry answered and heard the weight in Nneka's voice, he didn't even say hello. "Which woman left this time?" he asked, chuckling without joy. Nneka didn't laugh. He just sighed and said, "Henry, I think Gina is the reason none of them stayed." There was silence, a long, thoughtful one. Then Henry exhaled sharply. "So the penny has finally dropped." He explained how, over the years, he had observed Gina's subtle power moves, how she'd insert herself into conversations about Nneka's future, like she was the spouse, not the sibling, how she never asked for help managing the shops, but reacted coldly when anyone else offered assistance, how she subtly competed with every woman Nneka brought home, outdressing them, outspeaking them, and sometimes outright undermining them through side comments and sarcasm, 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 and sarcasm. "You thought she was protecting you," Henry said, his voice now tinged with fatigue, but what she was protecting was her space, her access, her control. You gave her the keys to your kingdom, Nneka, and she started building her own throne. The call ended with Henry's final words haunting him long after. "If you don't set new boundaries, she'll keep drawing the map with your blood." It was a metaphor, but it burned with the weight of prophecy. Nneka spent the next few days in solitude, his heart caught between loyalty and clarity. He didn't hate Gina. He couldn't. She had stood by him when their father died, when the first loan failed, when he moved abroad with just one suitcase and a half-written plan. She had been the one constant in a world of shifting tides. But love, he now realized, can wear many masks, sometimes even one that blinds. He remembered one December holiday when he had jokingly told Gina that whoever he married would be in charge of the shops. Her reaction had been quick, too quick for comfort. "Just make sure she knows where the ledgers are kept," she had said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Back then, he thought it was a joke. Now he wasn't so sure. He looked around his apartment at the photos, the certificates, the framed moments of a life built across borders. Yet in all of it, there was an emptiness, a missing link. He had built bridges across oceans, but had let the home front rot in silence. The fog was lifting now, slowly, steadily. And as it cleared, he saw what needed to be done, not in anger, not in vengeance, but in necessary correction. Because sometimes the most dangerous enemy is not the one who knocks on your gate, but the one who sleeps in your compound. NECA arrived in Iziora unannounced on a dusty Tuesday morning, dragging a single black duffel bag behind him, as if carrying not clothes, but quiet thunder. He didn't call ahead, didn't alert anyone, not even Gina. For the first time in years, he wanted to see things for what they were, not what people made them seem over filtered phone calls and curated photos. The town hadn't changed much, still the same old peeling signposts, familiar hum of motorcycle engines, women trading under faded umbrellas. But there was something about returning with suspicion in your heart that made even the wind sound accusatory. When he reached the compound, he stood at the gate for a moment, listening to the faint chime of gospel music coming from inside. He pushed it open gently. Gina was inside the supermarket's back office, tapping on her calculator, glasses resting low on her nose. She looked up, startled, but quickly wore a smile. "Brother," she exclaimed, rising quickly. "You didn't say you were coming. This one is surprise-o." The hug was brief, more polite than warm, like a transaction at a counter. "I just needed to come home and breathe our air for a bit," he said lightly. But beneath his voice, a storm was waiting for its cue. He watched her carefully, noting the ease with which she carried herself, like someone who had been rehearsing power long enough to forget it wasn't hers. There was a certain rhythm to her movement that told him she no longer saw herself as a caretaker, but as the owner of the throne she was asked to polish. The first few days were quiet, almost too quiet. Gina treated him like a visiting governor, freshly made food every hour, clean clothes laid out in advance, business reports delivered to his door like he was a shareholder and not the actual owner. But NECA noticed the small shifts, the way she'd pause when he asked about a sales figure, the vague tone when she mentioned staff rotations, the subtle delay when he requested to visit the dry cleaning shop. It was like she needed time to make the truth presentable. One afternoon, while she was out at the market, NECA took the opportunity to dig into the account books she had so meticulously arranged. What he found didn't scream theft or fraud. It was more subtle than that. Small discrepancies, repeated supplier names he didn't recognize, petty cash withdrawals that lacked purpose, inflated delivery charges, nothing that would make the police come knocking, but enough to prove that Gina had begun treating the business as her purse and pantry. He felt no anger, just a tightening in his chest, like discovering that the walls you trusted to protect you had quietly let termites in. That evening, as they sat in the corridor sipping Zobo, NECA asked gently, "Do you ever feel overwhelmed, Gina? Handling all this by yourself?" She chuckled, then shrugged. "Not really. It's second nature now. I know this business like I know my own pulse." That sentence stayed with him long into the night. She didn't say our business. She didn't even say your business. She said I. And sometimes, the way someone pronounces ownership tells you more than any contract ever will. The next morning, NECA decided to visit the dry cleaning outlet himself. He didn't tell Gina. He simply picked up the spare keys, called the shop manager discreetly, and drove down in a Kiki Napep to avoid attention. The building looked the same, but the energy had shifted. The walls were painted, yes, but painted with a bold purple instead of the brand's usual blue. Staff uniforms had changed. There were new names on the glass windows, Gina's Premium Laundry Services. He blinked. For a moment he thought he had walked into the wrong shop. But no, this was it. His logo was gone, his vision erased. Inside, the workers greeted him nervously, unsure whether to salute or apologize. The shop manager, a short man with quick eyes, walked over with a half smile. "Olga, I no say this surprise you small," he began. "Madam Gina say make we rebrand small. She talk saying our family still dey run him, but we fit make him more attractive like this." NECA nodded, a slow, silent nod that spoke more than a slap ever could. Rebrand. A word used to repaint betrayal as improvement. He thanked them politely, walked out slowly, and sat on the edge of the drainage by the road. Cars passed, children chased tires, and a woman sold roasted plantain across the street. But for Nneka, the world had tilted slightly on its axis. This wasn't just a sister managing her brother's business anymore. This was a woman who had slowly removed him from his own narrative and rewritten the story to place herself at the center. And she had done it not with rebellion, but with routine, stroke by stroke, day by day, until he was no longer needed in the empire he had built. That night, Nneka didn't wait for Gina to serve dinner. He called her into the sitting room, sat her down opposite him, and for the first time, peeled off every layer of polite silence they had shared over the years. "Gina," he began, his voice low but sharp, "I love you deeply. And I appreciate everything you've done. But something has changed, and we need to talk." Gina raised her eyebrows, caught off guard. He continued, "I've been watching, listening, thinking. You've done more than manage the business. You've absorbed it, made it yours in ways that were never discussed, rebranded shops, changed structures, blocked every woman I've tried to love." Gina laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Blocked?" she echoed. "You think I blocked them?" "Nneka, those girls didn't fit you. They wanted your money, your lifestyle. None of them understood the weight you carry." Nneka stood up. "Maybe, maybe not. But that was for me to decide. Not you." She rose too, her tone shifting from defensive to wounded. "Do you know what it feels like to build something and live in its shadow? Do you know how many nights I sat counting your money while praying mine would someday arrive?" Her voice cracked. "You left, Nneka. You started a new life. And you left me here to manage your world like I was your steward." Nneka swallowed hard. "I didn't ask you to sacrifice your life. I only trusted you to hold space until I returned." Gina looked away, her shoulders slumped like a flag after the wind. In that moment, there were no villains in the room, only two broken people who had mistaken duty for possession and silence for peace. The compound felt different the following morning, quieter, as though the air itself had overheard the previous night's confrontation and was unsure how to behave. Nneka woke before dawn, not because of any alarm, but because his mind had turned into a crowded bus with no break. He sat on the veranda, barefoot, the concrete cold against his soles, sipping lukewarm tea that tasted more like memories than comfort. Gina hadn't come out of her room yet. Normally, she'd be up before the first cock crowed, marching about like a general in uniform. But today, her door remained shut, her usual playlist of gospel hymns absent. Nneka didn't feel triumphant. There was no sweetness in proving someone wrong when your own heart bore the bruise. He had opened a wound that had been festering for years, and now both of them stood in the stench of its exposure. He watched the neighborhood slowly come alive, children with sleep still in their eyes fetching water, a hawker calling out her morning bread with more rhythm than enthusiasm, and the usual old man sweeping dust in circles. And still, Gina's door stayed shut. It reminded him of when they were younger, how after every childhood quarrel, she would sulk for days. Back then, an orange or a meat pie would bring her back to laughter. But now, things had matured into shadows, thicker, heavier, more stubborn than childhood whims, the kind of silence that no pastry could bribe. By afternoon, she finally emerged. Her face bore no makeup, her hair loosely tied, and her eyes slightly puffy, betraying the war she had fought alone through the night. She greeted him with a quiet nod and moved toward the shop, not uttering a word. Nneka let her go. He knew pushing further now would turn healing into hostility. Sometimes silence wasn't punishment, it was processing. He spent the day inspecting the shops, one after the other, but now not as a visitor or a distant owner. He met with staff individually, took notes, asked questions, listened more than he spoke. Many were surprised. A few stammered. One junior cashier almost cried from fear when he asked her to explain how weekly balancing was done, but he didn't shout or accuse. He wasn't there to embarrass. He was there to understand how much of his house had been eaten by termites while he was abroad building fences in another land. The deeper he dug, the clearer it became Gina hadn't just taken liberties. She had rewritten roles, altered foundations, created a structure that no longer needed him. His name might have remained on the company documents, but his essence had been quietly drained like palm wine tapped before it matures. Still, as much as the betrayal hurt, he also saw the labor. The systems she'd built weren't useless. In fact, some of her methods were smarter than his own. But it was the secrecy, the deliberate covering of truths, that left a bitter film on his tongue. You don't poison a man and then expect him to clap because the food was tasty. That evening, he asked her to join him on the bench outside the shop, a spot their father used to sit every evening before his stroke. She hesitated, but came. Neither of them spoke at first. The sun was setting, painting the compound with long shadows and tired light. A few chickens clucked lazily near the wall, and the sound of frying akara came faintly from a nearby stall. "Gina," he began gently, "I'm not here to cut you off. I'm here to make things right." She looked at him, her face unreadable. He continued, "You've worked hard. More than hard. I've been unfair too, leaving everything on your shoulders without ever asking how heavy it was. But we lost balance. Somewhere along the line, you stopped holding things for me and started holding them for me." She sighed but said nothing. "I want to restructure things, not to punish you, but to bring us both into a space where we don't have to compete. You'll still be involved, but I'm bringing in someone to co-manage. I'll handle things more directly too, weekly reviews, digital reporting, proper oversight." Her brows lifted slightly. "Who?" she asked, her voice brittle. "Someone professional," he replied. "Not a girlfriend. Just someone with no stake in our hearts, so we can all breathe." She looked away. "You think I wanted to be the enemy?" she said quietly. "I only fought for the thing that gave me identity." Her voice cracked at the edge. "I didn't know who I was without this." Nneka nodded. "Then let's make it something that gives both of us identity. Not one person hiding and the other disappearing." They sat a while longer, the silence finally softening between them, not healed, but healing. Later that night, Nneka sat on his old mattress in his childhood bedroom, staring at the cracked ceiling that had survived 2 rainy seasons without repair. He thought about the women who had walked away, about how their silence now made sense in the light of Gina's quiet but intentional sabotage. It wasn't hatred, it wasn't jealousy, it was fear. Fear of being replaced, of losing relevance, of watching the world shift without her seat secured, and truthfully, a part of him understood. Loneliness can turn even the best of hearts into fortresses. He thought of Adez, the look in her eyes when she first met him, and the way that light dimmed after meeting his sister. He reached for his phone, fingers hovering over her name. After a moment, he typed a message. "I understand now. I didn't before, and I'm sorry. Not asking for anything, just wanted to say I see it all clearly now." He sent it and dropped the phone beside him. Whether she replied or not, he knew this was the first real step in cleaning his house, not just the floors and the books, but the rooms in his heart that had become cluttered with unspoken wounds. He stretched out and let the stillness of the room cover him like a thin sheet. Outside, a dog barked, the breeze whispered through the curtain, and the moonlight painted the walls with the kind of quiet only forgiveness could allow. The following weeks unfolded like a calm aftershock. Less noise, more tremors. Gina kept her word and stepped back gradually, not with pettiness, but with a strange calm that came from exhaustion and perhaps a dash of relief. Nneka didn't rush her, didn't throw legal documents in her face, or tear down her efforts in a show of power. He moved slowly, like someone trying to rearrange a bookshelf that had been standing lopsided for too long. He brought in a young professional named Cyril, a level-headed man in his 30s with no family ties and no interest in gossip, whose job was strictly structure and reports. Cyril respected Gina, but didn't worship her, and his presence allowed things to breathe again. For the first time in years, Neka's businesses stopped feeling like secrets he couldn't access. His hands returned to the wheels, not to take everything back, but to steer with more clarity. The employees relaxed. Even the customers noticed. Little by little, things began to align. Gina spent more time at home, helping their mother with a small poultry project she'd long neglected. She began writing again, short devotionals and journal entries she once loved but abandoned somewhere in the thicket of responsibility. There were still days when tension hung in the air like mist before rainfall, but those moments passed more quickly now. Sometimes growth isn't a leap, it's a long, aching stretch where you don't hear applause, but you know you've moved. Meanwhile, across the town of Ngodo, Odyssey had quietly gone on with her life, tending to her father's printing business with the kind of quiet excellence that didn't need announcement. She hadn't responded to Neka's message, but she'd read it more than once. It stayed in her phone like a bookmarked page, visited on evenings when the day's work was done and her heart wandered. She wasn't angry anymore. Just cautious. She had learned the hard way that not all battles come with sirens. Some arrive dressed in smiles and approval. And love, no matter how deep, cannot survive in a house where trust cannot breathe. She remembered how Gina's words chipped at her confidence day after day, how her laughter began to shrink, how she found herself doubting things that once felt certain. But she also remembered Neka's voice, the way he listened, the way he never once made her feel like she had to perform womanhood to be worthy of it. And so, one Tuesday morning, after dropping off a large consignment at the university office, she walked to a quiet cafe and typed out a simple message. "I got your message. Maybe we can talk someday soon, not to fix anything, just to say what wasn't said." She sent it, placed the phone face down, and sipped her tea. There was no weight on her chest, no thundering heart, just air, clean, slow, forgiving. When Neka received the message, he was sitting in the small back room of the supermarket, reviewing inventory updates. The moment he read her words, he didn't smile. He simply exhaled, a long breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding since the night she left. He didn't call immediately. He didn't write a 3-paragraph reply. He just typed, "Whenever you're ready. I'll come to you." That evening, he told Gina about the message. Not to stir drama or rub salt into a scar, but as a way of marking a new chapter where secrecy would no longer be the currency of their relationship. Gina nodded slowly. "You loved her," she said quietly. "Still do," he replied. She didn't argue. She didn't offer advice. She simply said, "Then go gently." Some women come like water. They stay when you hold them with open hands. A week later, Neka traveled to Ngodo. Not in a convoy or with grand gestures. He wore a simple shirt, held a small leather-bound notebook, and met Adiz in the same cafe where she had sent the message. They spoke for hours. Not about marriage, not about blame. They spoke like two old friends who had lived through a storm and were now trading notes on how to build roofs that could hold against the wind. It wasn't romantic, not yet. But it was real. And sometimes, the beginning you need doesn't wear perfume or flowers. It wears honesty and quiet listening. Back in Iziora, things continued at a slower, more human pace. Gina had taken to evening walks, her slippers echoing softly along the narrow footpaths, often pausing to greet elderly women who once thought she was too proud to smile. Neka returned to Cardiff not long after. But this time, he carried more than documents and guilt. He carried peace, not the dramatic kind that sweeps you off your feet, but the steady, patient kind that grows like a tree, one root at a time. He and Gina spoke weekly, not as boss and assistant, but as siblings who had both finally accepted that love is not ownership. The business grew steadily under new management, but Neka made sure Gina's efforts were never erased. He credited her openly, thanked her loudly, and included her in board decisions, not to appease her, but to remind her that her value was never in control, but in contribution. And as for Adiz, their conversations resumed, This time with no assumptions, no countdowns to proposal. Just two people choosing to learn each other slowly. Whatever came next would come not because they forced it, but because it bloomed. And if it didn't bloom, there would still be light. Because now they all knew the cost of silence. They had lived its sting. And in the end, they chose words, not to wound, but to heal. Sometimes the loudest heartbreak doesn't come from lovers. It comes from family. It's the pain you can't explain, the betrayal you didn't expect, the silence you mistake for peace. But like Nneka, we must all come to that place where love is no longer confused with control, and loyalty is no longer mistaken for ownership. If you're the one who has been holding someone else's dream too tightly, ask yourself, are you protecting it, or are you hiding in it because you're afraid to build your own? And if you're the one whose voice has been slowly erased in the name of duty or family, take heart. Your voice still matters. Don't let guilt keep you where growth is calling you to leave. Let this story remind you that healing doesn't always arrive with apologies or roses. Sometimes it comes wrapped in accountability, boundaries, and truth-telling. Sometimes the people we love the most need to hear no in order to learn what yes truly means. And sometimes, like Gina, the very people hurting you are also hurting themselves. So choose growth. Choose clarity over comfort. Choose forgiveness without losing your footing. And above all, don't be afraid to start again slowly, this time with open eyes and steady hands. Father, we come to you with hearts that have known both the sweetness of loyalty and the sting of betrayal. We lift every listener who has ever felt torn between love and truth, between honoring family and honoring their own peace. Lord, heal every wound caused by silence, every tear shed in confusion, and every relationship strained by unspoken expectations. Teach us to speak when we should, and to listen when silence holds more wisdom than words. For those carrying heavy responsibilities like Jaina, give them the courage to step back and rediscover their own light. For those like Nneka, who trusted too long and doubted too late, grant them wisdom, peace, and the boldness to reclaim their space with grace. We pray for broken relationships to be mended where possible, and for new beginnings to bloom from the ashes of misunderstandings. Replace every bitterness with clarity, every distance with direction, and every lingering guilt with gentle growth. And for anyone whose heart is tired, whose trust has been shaken, Lord, wrap them in your peace like a soft blanket on a stormy night. May favor meet them where they least expect. May laughter return to places where pain once lived. And may their next chapter be sweeter, stronger, and more rooted than ever before. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. See you again in my next story.